I get fan mail. I do. And sometimes the fan mail is so misguided that it has about the same impact on me as hate mail. Let's get into it. Question number 1. I get this a lot. I get this to all kinds of variations on the theme. What is the big deal with learning ancient languages anyway? Richard Gombrich says I can learn Pali in 2 weeks. My Dharma master says he learned Sanskrit in 3 months. Blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah. There are a lot of scams going in terms of language ability. And I mean, people in academia really like to just add one more line to their resume. You know, nothing's easier to add to your CV than fluent in blank. Especially if you're at a university where nobody can check your credentials. If you're the only guy on campus who says he knows Sanskrit, who is going to tell you that you don't know Sanskrit? It's very, very hard to really gain ability in any language, living or dead, and it's very, very easy to fake it in most academic contexts and in most religious contexts. As soon as you've got religious hierarchy, people are not allowed to question you, or you're the only one allowed to ask questions. I remember there was a Buddhist monk trying to get a PhD at my university in Canada as a student. And you know, I read his work. I read an essay by him. And my professor, the head of the department, commented that you could tell he wasn't really reading the original text. He wasn't really looking at the Pali or other ancient languages involved. And he said very simply, you can tell he's not really doing the reading because he doesn't find problems with it. Interesting comment, because that professor, his own work related to Japanese and Old Chinese. But it stuck with me because it's true. People who do the reading, the real reading, always find problems in the text. And that's true even if you're reading Shakespeare. And Shakespeare's use of English is not that different from modern English. But there are a lot of problems. There are a lot of points where the text doesn't make sense, or you're left wondering, did this word used to be some other word? Even in Shakespeare. And certainly if you're looking at ancient Greek, Latin, any other example like that. So, no, the vast majority of people who say that they know these languages, whether they say they learned it in 2 weeks or 3 months, whether they say they learned it in a cave in Tibet, or they learned it in a classroom in London, England, no matter what they say, it's somewhere between fraud and a tremendous exaggeration most of the time. And I mean, I've had so many cases where you know, people with PhDs correspond with me, and I've read their work and I say to them, look, I can tell you're not reading the original text, because what you're saying here, the philosophical claim you're making, if you had read the Pali, you would know this doesn't relate to the original text in any way. So you get a lot of broken telephone going on. You get a lot of this scam of, oh, I'm going to quote something that somebody else said indirectly about the ancient text, and I'm going to pretend it's my opinion based on my original research or my original translation. Depressing. And then when you wrap it up in a robe and start asking for donations and start telling people that you can cure cancer with your magical meditation techniques, man, it gets off the rails quick. The worst aspects of human nature start to show up before you know it. How much of any language can you learn in 2 weeks? 2 weeks is about enough time. If you remember the old days when you would actually buy an album on a piece of plastic, 2 weeks is about enough time when you were a kid to learn all the lyrics on an album. Maybe you got a new favorite album, you listen to it every day, and after 2 weeks, you know all the lyrics. But even then, there would be some phrases that you can't quite hear correctly, that you can't quite break down into words, where you don't quite know what the singer is saying. And, most of us growing up, we have the experience of thinking we know the lyrics to a song. And then years later, you find out what the words actually were. Well, if you're talking about a foreign language, there's no comparison. If you go out now and buy an album in a language you don't speak, especially from a different language family, Chinese, Cree, you name it, a totally alien language, even if you listen to that album again and again and again for 2 weeks, many times a day, even if you try to memorize it, you're not going to be able to break down the words into parts. You're not going to be able to know what's going on phonetically, grammatically, or otherwise. So you'll really just have a set of familiar sounds that you can't do much with. And with Buddhism, that's pretty close to the type of language learning that most people do. You may learn to chant what are basically songs. You may learn to memorize and repeat a bunch of syllables, and they may be badly mispronounced. Most of the Buddhist traditions today, it's pretty hard to figure out what they're saying. I remember Philiosat told me they had some kind of annual Buddhist party at one of the Buddhist institutions in Paris. And they would invite Buddhist monks kind of from every consulate and culture that was in Paris and try to get them to all chant in unison. And each of the representatives had a different, terrible mispronunciation of the same Pali text. So it was a complete cacophony. You couldn't hear anything clearly. And out of tune, out of pace, out of step. Sounded awful. She said she showed up to witness this spectacle for several years in a row. Not that much to do if you're a scholar of Buddhism living in Paris, I think. I'm not sure if that's a sad story or a happy story. What was my point? You can listen to an album in your own language and learn all the lyrics in 2 weeks. You can't do that with an album in a foreign language, even if it's a foreign language pretty closely related to your own. And to do that in a foreign language that today is ancient, doesn't have anyone alive who can speak it, good luck. Learning a language, really being able to read an ancient language is very hard work. Being able to read a philosophy in a language is very hard work. And in 3 months, even if we're talking about an easy language, well, hey, come on, let's say Chinese. In 3 months, you can learn how to say, excuse me, where's the bathroom? And how much does this cost? And other useful phrases like that in Chinese. But how are you going to, read or debate or dispute philosophy in Chinese after 3 months? Impossible. With that having been said, I always used to tell people, hey, I never learned how to say where's the bathroom in Pali. But I did learn how to say where's the bathroom in Lao, Thai, Cambodian, and the other modern languages I studied. Alright, question number 2. Whew. This one, man, the way this kind of question gets phrased, you never know. It's always a mix of fan mail and hate mail. Why would you even want to get into a PhD program? You are much better off working independently on your own. Life is so much harder with a PhD. Let me tell you how hard my own life is, blah, blah, blah. Ooh, I got 2 or 3 different messages like that this month from people who are today professors. And part of it is, everyone likes the opportunity to complain. And a lot of professors feel they can write to me and tell me how hard their life is. I don't even know if they're trying to console me or trying to console themselves. I think they're trying to make themselves feel better about what they do with their lives. Over the years, I talked to different specialists about the option of doing an MA, doing a PhD, partly because I already had the proven ability to do research in various languages and contexts. I was like, well, look, I've been out here for so many years, this type of stuff I've already done. It would be pretty easy for me to go into an MA or PhD program and do some kind of work and see what doors that could open me. The flip side of that is the institutions I was talking to could often offer absolutely nothing in return. This actually comes back to the first question. A lot of these universities, I just ask a really simple question like, oh, okay, well, you say you teach Pali. What's the name of the professor who teaches Pali? Because you don't have anyone listed on your staff with competence in Pali who's actually teaching the course. Even with Thai, I mean, one university I talked to was like, you know, okay, so you say you have a degree in Thai studies. Who is the professor teaching Thai? You have no one on staff listed doing it. Ooh, I mean, you know, a lot of universities are eager to take your money and provide you with absolutely no education in return. And the sad thing is, when you're talking about Buddhism or Asian studies, the things that interested me, none of them lead to any money. So, you know, there's this sense of can't we be honest? Can't we be cooperative? Can't we be honest with each other and ourselves when there's no money involved? I mean, if you sit down at a meeting where everyone's just there to make money, I understand why they're going to lie and cheat and rob and pillage. I understand why people are dishonest when there's money involved. But I mean, wow, you know, from the language work to the humanitarian work, it's amazing that you sit down with people who have, you know, they have no way of making money out of the situation, but they still act like a den of thieves. Sad. Yeah, you know, the other side of it is these people who write into me, who themselves have PhDs and are professors and so on, I think they're just used to talking to people who became, you know, chartered accountants. And I guess they're just really used to saying to those people, you know, you're better off without a PhD, just living as an accountant, making money. And, you know, maybe that's true. Maybe they know people who became accountants and dentists and got normal professions and so on. But it's tremendously crass and sensitive because who do you think you're talking to? You know, got a message a couple of days ago that was really specifying that I had lived a better life out in Laos and Cambodia doing my own thing than this guy had lived with a PhD and a series of academic posts. It's like, well, you want to trade places with me? You know, no matter how tough your conditions are, the real source of stress is not knowing where your next meal is coming from, is not knowing where your next paycheck is coming from. It's knowing that even if you have food and shelter today, you don't know where your home is going to be 3 months from now. You don't know how you're going to pay rent in the very short term. And, you know, for a lot of my adult life, since I finished my BA, which is the only diploma I've still got, that has been true of me. And no, I mean, you know, salaried academics, I sympathize to some extent with the ways in which they feel their lives are held, but they haven't coped with that stress. And they don't know what it's like to go to a hospital in Vientiane, Laos, and to communicate with the hospital staff in Laos to try to address whatever medical emergency you've got. They don't know what that's like. And, you know, they don't know what it's like to do that when you're flat broke. You know? I paid the Lao rates, man, when I had to get medical care in Vientiane. I didn't have any fancy foreigners coverage, and I paid the same low prices that local Lao citizens did, and I got the same quality of treatment too, let me tell you. But seriously, that's also why I wanted to do what I did relatively young in life. I had a couple professors who were inspirations to me in a kind of negative sense. One of my professors, you know, he had never spent any time in Asia. He lived his whole life in Canada. And, you know, I thought, I don't want to go down that path and then be in the situation of just starting to explore Asia when I'm 50 years old, 60 years old, of doing what's at the core of my research interests when I'm too old to really do it, when I'm too old to take risks, go out, get malaria, break your leg, get into life and death situations, do the humanitarian work and so on. You know, I really realized that I want to do that now or never. And of course, I'm very glad that I did. And you know, one of my other professors, I remember he said to me at the end of my BA, he said, look, go to Asia now, go to the field, go do what you want, do it now. Because when you come back, this was his opinion, so, you know, there are two types of guys in academia. There are the guys who went there and did that, rolled up their sleeves, and they know what it is. They know what the work in the field is. And then he just paused and sort of waved a hand. And I filled in his sentence and I said, and then there are the guys who never even tried. And, you know, he smiled and he agreed with me. He said, yeah, right. So even if those professors were kind of an inspiration to me in a negative sense, you know, I really appreciated that I'd kind of, I went out and directly got in the field, something that other people would have to jump through hoops for years and years to get to. And the world was changing so fast during that decade that, I mean, the very few opportunities I had wouldn't exist anymore. I'd also say that, you know, to my chagrin, I remember I showed up at the what used to be called the National University of Ceylon, the Peradeniya University in Sri Lanka. I showed up at this university, one of the very few universities that really teaches Pali as a subject. I put down on the table, just at the start of the discussion, a notebook that had my handwritten work in Pali. And I had handwriting in literary Sinhalese, Burmese, Cambodian, Lao. I didn't just write Pali in Roman orthography. I developed my handwriting up to a certain level in all those traditions. And I sat down to talk to the professors about the possibility of studying there. And they looked at what I'd written in Pali. And they said right away, no, no, no. You wouldn't be able to take any of the courses here. You're already much too advanced for even our level 4 course. And you know, I wasn't flattered, and I didn't feel good about it, and I tried to laugh it off, and I said, no, 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 if I study here, I would want to have the experience of being in these classes and hearing the language spoken and so on. And they looked at me really aghast, because they thought, they thought correctly, I just didn't realize how awful the classes were. And you know, at that time, really, I was still pretty close to being a beginner myself. The sentences I had written out, you know, were no great accomplishment in terms of Pali comprehension. But I'd worked hard for a couple of years at that point, and a couple of years of hard work alone, independently, is indeed more valuable than 4 years or 6 years in an academic system that wastes a lot of your time, wastes a lot of your money, puts you in a situation where you can't work at your own pace, even if your own pace would be faster than what the class is doing. Man, I get this question all the time. Thank you so much for your blog. Thank you for your articles. I am just finishing my university diploma, and I want to do exactly the same thing you did. I find your story so inspirational. I want to buy a plane ticket to Laos, etc., etc. Oh. I get a couple different people each year, maybe about 3 different guys a year, and they're always male, they're always guys, who have this reaction to my work. And man, you know, the feeling, it's like if you were a jazz singer and every jazz song you sing is about how women and alcohol and singing jazz has ruined your life, you know? And every day people come up to you and say, yeah, I love your album, I love your songs, man, you know, I want to be just like you when I grow up. I want to sing jazz and get involved with women and alcohol and all the things you're warning me about. Woo! You know, I'd like to think that everything I've written is a really strong warning against anyone trying to do what I did. And it's both a warning about what was impossible at the time And also, my articles are very careful to warn you about how things have changed in even just a few years. When I arrived in Vientiane, the capital city of Laos, the whole city had, I think, 2 traffic lights. In the downtown city, there were 2 traffic lights, and there were 0 bank machines. Electric banking didn't exist yet. And when people would ask me, excuse me, where's the nearest international bank machine, I would proudly say to them, Thailand. You have to cross the border to use an international bank machine. That changed. Today, the whole country is wired up. For better or worse, they've got traffic lights, bank machines, and all the rest of it. And I mean, the real opportunities were probably about 20 years before I arrived. I met an old German guy who showed up in Laos maybe 20 years before I did. And at that stage, you know, they were so desperate for skilled help of any kind. You know, if you just showed up with good intentions, you could find some kind of work to do. But, you know, the culture of corruption closes in a country, much like those electronic networks, and those opportunities disappear. And, you know, the potential of one person to make a positive difference disappears along with it, because I wasn't there to make money. So in many ways, you know, even though it's such a short span of time, the Laos I knew no longer exists. And, you know, a book that is both inspirational and a warning, Richard Gombrich's very first book, Precept and Practice. That book describes a whole world in Sri Lanka that does not exist anymore. It doesn't exist in the city, it doesn't exist in the countryside. And I remember, you know, the last time I talked to him face to face, I praised that book to him. I said, you know, that book was an inspiration to me when I was starting out. And he said, today, nobody could do that research. Because what he studied in Sri Lanka is no longer there to be studied. And he had the money in institutional banking to do the research. Sorry. He had the money and institutional backing to do the research, whereas I worked completely independently. My support was whatever part-time job I could get along the way to put a roof over my head. That's the whole story, folks. Stop sending me fan mail that sounds like hate mail. I got 12 years of this, man. Seriously, like already like 2003, I got fan mail back then.